Welcome, everybody, to the Salty Pastor Podcast. I am Douglas Peak, and I am your Salty Pastor. Basically, what that means is I am here to be the salt. I'm here to be the seasoning that makes a difference in life. The reason I call myself the Salty Pastor is because Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, he says, you are the light of the world, you are the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its saltiness, it is good for nothing but to be thrown out on the dung heap. So, wanting to avoid being thrown out on the dung heap, I hope to continue to be salty and basically help you learn what it is that you believe, that you clarify what it is that you believe and why you believe it. I want to answer the question of why. And the reason for that is because so many people believe things, they don't know why they believe them. And then when they are confronted, when they're challenged, when life becomes difficult, their beliefs are not strong enough to sustain them, guide them, lead them, or give them strength in a difficult time or when it's challenged. And therefore, they kind of crumble like a house of cards. One of the most important things that you can do, particularly in a society that we are in today, where it's being challenged and pushed and pressured by all these ideologically driven groups, is you need to know why you believe it. And that is, why do I believe that there is a God? Why do I believe that Jesus Christ is God and that only He can save and redeem my soul? Why do I believe that the United States of America is built upon core values that are beneficial to all human beings, whether they believe in God or not? You see, you have to be able to answer these questions. Otherwise, what happens is people fan the flames of discontent, of fear, of anger, of trauma. They fan these flames, and then they try to manipulate you to buy into their system. And as the 1970s rock group The Who once said in their song, "Let's Not Be Fooled Again," or "Don't Get Fooled Again," he says, the new boss is the same as the old boss. I hope we don't get fooled again. And it turns out you were. So the key is, I believe, when you know what you believe and why you believe it, doesn't make you a perfect person, doesn't make all your problems go away. But what it does do is it gives you a sense of centeredness about who you are. It gives you a sense of conviction about what's right and wrong. It allows you to train your senses, as the writer of Hebrews says, to discern good and bad. That's evil, we should stay away from it. This is good. So it helps you do that. And that's why I'm here, as I want to coach you in this. I don't want to tell you what to eat, what to wear, what music to listen to, who to vote for. I don't want to tell you what to do with your money. I don't want to do any of those things because that's religion, and I'm not interested in pushing a religion on you. What I am interested in doing is helping you, coach you in how to discover what is true and what is not, so that you draw your own convictions. Because in the end, this is about your faith, not my faith. And I want your faith to grow. So that's why I'm here, and that's what I am doing. One of the things that we have recently been talking about is political violence, particularly due to the fact that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And what's interesting is the irony of it, and that is his entire approach. He had no political power. He didn't hold any political office. He wasn't really a lobbyist per se, meaning paying money to people to try to push legislation. He had a lot of strong opinions, but his primary goal of his organization was to go to college campuses and was to engage in dialogue with young people. And the reason he did this is because in his heart of hearts, he believed that our public education system, and there's a boatload of research to prove that he was right, was indoctrinating young people, that people were not learning how to think for themselves. And so he wanted to have rational discussions with young people, pointing out an alternative perspective that they haven't heard. And so he was a strong proponent of free speech for everybody. And his point was, we need more speech, not less speech. And what's interesting is he was shot while doing that very thing. And so that's the irony of it. And so how is it that people justify violence? We've talked about this. I talked about Eric Erickson's article in previous podcasts where he says that, a lot of professors on college campuses are saying that when your speech makes somebody feel uncomfortable and then that uncomfortableness turns into some type of depression or anxiety, then that has a material impact on a person. So therefore you could say that speech is violence. And of course, this is a fallacy in logic. It's called a non sequitur. Also, it's called what I call streamlining causal distinctions. And whenever you streamline causal distinctions, meaning, well, this causes this, and then this causes this, and then this causes this, you always widen the gaps in between each cause to get to where you're at. And it takes a lot of clear thinking to realize how crazy this is. Like, for instance, one of the biggest problems out in scientific field today is the issue of evolution, and it's about biogenesis. And what's happening today, and why fewer scientists are becoming evolutionists, though they're not willing to abandon it completely because they don't know, the next framework, is because of this issue of biogenesis. And that is that what Darwin showed or attempted to show is that once you have living creatures, they can evolve. Well, everybody believes in adaptability. That's always been the case. People don't deny that. But the critics of evolution say that the notion that life could spring from non-life is just preposterous. And this is the notion of biogenesis. And that is, you could say, even though there is no, fossil record proving this, and by the way, our fossil record is awesome. I mean, the size of the fossil record today is just unbelievably huge. And nowhere in the fossil record does it ever show any evolutionary step from one species to another. It shows adaptability, but it never shows any steps. It just doesn't do it. And to believe that it does is simply just false. Now, that's a salty thing to say, but it's true. Now, that doesn't mean you have to, if you're committed to evolution, abandon it. You just have to say, okay, that's true. If I'm going to prove it or say I believe it, I need to find another logical, rational, factual basis on which to believe it. But the point of bringing this up is simply this, is that the issue of going from no life to a single cell, anything that could start replicating, that gap, that leap is so big, it makes it the notion of evolution from, prehistoric, man or whatever, kind of the not quite human being into what we are today. That first step is bigger than that entire process. And so that's why it's such a difficult thing to deal with. And so people are talking about biogenesis. Now, why am I bringing all this up? And that is, well, the reason why we're bringing it up is because ideologies have an impact. And sometimes people, even the brightest, smartest people, will believe really irrational things, right? Because inside, it's their belief that says this has to be true, even though it's not. And so you end up having to believe a lot of really crazy things out there. That's why one of the things that I've always done is I've always tried to say, well, is what I believe crazy, or is it the most rational thing? And I think in some ways, believing there is a God and believing that Christ came in order to redeem us is for number one, a wonderful story revealed in the scriptures, but also it's the most rational, logical explanation for our existence as human beings. It's really the most rational explanation for the existence of mathematics. It's the most rational or reasonable explanation for the fact that you as a human being have sentience and that you can actually reason through things on your own. The list goes on and on and on. And so I believe that if we don't fight for clarifying belief built on reason and rationality and these types of things, we can get off track pretty quick. And that's why I believe that love is the central point of Christianity. And that is that God loves you. He God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. And we find love in Jesus, that he loves us, we love him, and that's what we were driven. But love drives us to fight, right? Or contend for that which is good. A buddy of mine sent me a verse that says, hey, I was reading out of Jude. How many people ever read the book of Jude? Yeah, it's the book right before Revelation. And yet he was writing, he said, hey, I pointed out verse 3 and he sent it to me and I wanted to read it for you, give a shout out to Brock about this. He says, beloved, while I was making every effort to write you about our common salvation, I felt the necessity to write to you appealing that you contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. So he's saying, you need to contend. You need to be a contender. You need to be a fighter for that which is good, because real love fights. Now, I was thinking of all this, and I'm driving in my truck, and I come up on this minivan, and on the back of the minivan was a bumper sticker, and it says, real men love Jesus. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I was thinking about this, and it hit that I read that, and I said, well, in principle, I really believe that is true. I said, but it just hits different because what are you trying to say? And I realized a couple things of why it hit different. Number one is our society's redefined the authentic Jesus, right? I mean, most people don't have any idea who Jesus really was, what he said, and what he contended for, and what he did and why he did it. One of the things that I get, well, Jesus is love. We need to love like Jesus, and therefore we're not going to talk about hell and we're not going to talk about judgment. And I'm like, okay, I hate to tell you this, but the person who talked about hell more than anybody else in the Bible was Jesus. Yeah, he talked about it all the time. And so I think it's really interesting that he did that. So I don't think people really know Jesus. I mean, I've been following Jesus for, I don't know, since 1978. So that's a long time, if you want to do the math. And I'm still discovering who he is, right, in new ways. I'm much better at knowing what he's not than what I believe him to be. And I'm trying to align my beliefs with the reality of what is revealed in the scripture, the reality of my interactions with him in prayer and followership as I follow him, following his guides and his leadership in my life. And so it's been a great journey, and I think it's going to continue to be a great journey. But we got to contend. And the question that I've been asking this week is, how does love fight? I mean, if love is our driving action and we're supposed to be contenders, how do we contend? How do we love and fight at the same time? And I decided to rewrite that bumper sticker, okay? And I rewrote it this way. Real men love first so that they know what they're fighting for. When it comes to men, and I think women do this through nurturing and building and other things as well, but I want to focus this particularly on men. All men fight. All men fight. It's in your DNA. It's in your nature. It's in your soul. Now, if you don't know what you're fighting for, you end up fighting against anything or everything. And this is the definition of foolishness. Now, if you want to fight for the right thing, a good thing, a thing that will make you proud of what you fought for, and then the end result of fighting for it produces in your life deeper meaning and purpose, then you have to start with love. You cannot start with anything other than love. I was reading this book about people who joined the military, and about soldiers and why soldiers fight and so forth. And they kind of broke it down into 3 groups, which I don't know how accurate this is, but it says you have a group of people that see the military is kind of their path out of, they come from a lack of means. They don't have opportunity. So they join the military, and that gives them a path out of wherever they're from. So they see it as a process of escape and maybe discovering a new life. Then you have another group of people that see the military serve as it's an act of love for their country and sacrifice. You saw a lot of this after the attack on Pearl Harbor, where hundreds of thousands of young men went to sign up to fight because they wanted to serve their country. They were patriotic. You saw this right after 9/11, where people, wanting to fight. Probably one of the most famous people was a professional football player for the Cardinals and the Phoenix down in Phoenix by the name of Pat Tillman, who was then later died while he was serving in an accident. But what's interesting is he was a active professional football player, but after 9/11, he left his football career where he was making tons of money and joined the military in order to serve. So there's a group of people that serve out of love for country, love of family. It's a tradition. And then they said there's a small group of people join the military just because they want to break things and kill people. And they're like, those people are dangerous. They're unpredictable. And I think what's really interesting is to point out is that the best soldiers come from people who serve out of a love for their country, love for their family, and they want to give service. And so men want to fight, and men fight, but the men who fight properly and for the good things that make a difference not only in their lives but the lives of the people around them are men who start with love. Now, you can't start with selfishness because that just becomes narcissistic. But if you start with love, which, by the way, that's what your soul is wired for, is love, you end up fighting for something that is right. And it also gives you a moral compass, right? When you're in a situation where you have to make some really difficult moral decisions, maybe even as a fighter in the U.S. military, generally, probably 99% of all orders that are given are great orders, right? And you follow them. That's what you're supposed to do. But what about the 1% of leadership that's corrupt? I think it's safe to say that there's probably corruption or selfish officers in the military. You can't escape people who are, or any institution where there are people who are corrupt, and they give you an unlawful order. How do you know when to stand up against that? How do you know when you can deny that? Well, if you're motivated by love, you have a moral compass in which you are able to do that. This is why G.K. Chesterton said that a real soldier, the person who contends for something that is good, fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him. And so I just want to give you a couple principles here, and that is love is the underlying motivation of the human soul. So if you want to go fight, and we're going to fight evil ideologies that produce people that want to kill innocent people like Charlie Kirk, that blow up churches when they disagree with them, when they're so angry that they're not getting what they want from the government, that they'll riot in the streets and or maybe storm the Capitol. It doesn't matter who it is or what they're doing. The bottom line is, if we want to fight against evil ideologies that produce political violence, then we have to start with love, because that's a motivation of the human soul. You can't fight out of anger, because once your anger is gone, your motivation for fighting is gone. But if you're motivated by love, you can carry the fight till you get the good victory that is needed. Men and women are motivated by love in different ways, and it's important to understand that. Men and women pursue love in different ways, which basically means we're going to fight in different ways. And so we need to realize that when men and women are motivated by love, it impacts their ethics. And what you believe is one of the most important things about you, because if you get people that believe bad things in positions of authority within an institution, that institution can become corrupt. Consider the justice system for just a moment. Let's think about that. Let's talk about it. The goal of the justice system in America is to do what? Be blind in its application. It's supposed to bring justice equally for all. Now, this is based on a biblical concept where it's wrong to deny justice to the poor, widow, or orphan. People who really have no sway over society. They don't have any clout that they can throw around. They should be able to get justice equally as the wealthiest or most politically influential person that is out there. Lady Justice is always depicted with the balance of scales, in her hand, right? She's weighing the right and wrong, but a blindfold as she is holding the scales of justice. Now, I think it's important to understand, though, is that our justice system can easily be corrupted. You could take a prosecutor without ethics or who's been corrupted, and then they can falsely accuse somebody of a crime and then destroy their life by bankrupting them, right? They can do it. And then at the end go, oops, and there's no recourse or accountability. You could take a defense lawyer that has information, facts, and he hides them from the court and the prosecution in order to get his client, a killer, set free. These things happen. Or the biggest one, the most challenging one is you take a judge that has been paid off or bribed, and then that judge can influence the outcome of the trial. And what does this do? It corrupts justice. It corrupts the system. And the system, once it becomes corrupted, can ultimately collapse. Here's the main point. The system only works if those who are operating the system are ethical people who have the same values as everyone else operating the system. This is a very specific point where diversity is a corrupting weakness. Now, you can have a diversity of ethnicity, you can have a diversity of culture, but what you can't have is a diversity of values and the belief that justice is supposed to be objective and blind and fair no matter what. Look at science. We could use that as an example to illustrate this point. What do you do when you have people who falsify outcomes of tests, scientific tests, because they're trying to get grant money? That's what happens. This is one of the reasons why when the government is funding scientific research, a lot of the research turns out to be fake research. Why? Because these are the people who are getting grants. One of the biggest areas that has really been a problem is the issue of the transgender ideology that says you need to transition children. And now if you're an adult and you can do whatever you want with your body, that's fine. That's not the issue. The issue is with kids. And so what happened is people produced studies that said that, well, if you help a kid transition, giving them puberty blockers and surgeries, then they have a less likelihood of committing suicide, which the suicide rate in the transgender community is over 40%, which is massive. I mean, that's just massive. And it shows the severity of this mental health issue out there and how devastating it is to people who are struggling with it. Well, guess what? Those studies turned out to be false. The results manufactured. And there was no longitudinal aspect to them. And just recently, a longitudinal study, meaning over a long period of time, tracking outcomes over a long period proved just the opposite. This is why the leading countries in Europe that were very pro-transitioning kids have taken a huge step back and stopped doing that. And they're moving in a different direction. What do you do when people falsify outcomes because they're trying to get grant money or they want a certain political perspective out there? The Guttmacher Institute is a research study that was formed by Planned Parenthood. And they've tried over and over again to scientifically prove that getting an abortion is good and healthy for you. And they failed at every course. They publish studies, and then those studies are refuted. One of the most famous studies I think that I took note of is there was a man, I think he was Korean, who said that he had discovered cold fusion, which is a massive breakthrough in physics. It's going to solve all of our energy problems, right? Well, it turned out to be false. Now, studies and research are so important to our politics. So much of what we decide to do is based on research or data. And the only way we know if any political program that's set up and funded and operate, if it actually achieves the goals or not, is based on the research and the data that we collect on the efficacy of the program. But what's interesting is there's a cottage industry out there that produces false data and research to prove any point that you want. What about healing and wholeness? Let's look at a totally different thing. And what I'm doing is I'm showing that this is a ideological issue that infects all these different things that have a huge impact on our lives. And this is about the healing and wholeness industry in the United States of America, the therapy industry. There's no shortage of people who are licensed therapists who want to coach you, help you, or give you therapy. But like when it comes to marriage and family issues, did you know that 75% of marriage and family therapists are female and only 60% of them are married? Now, what does that prove? Well, I think that it proves that marriage and family therapy is driven by a pretty singular ideology. And maybe that's why the success rate for couples who go to marriage and family therapy is around 30-something%. That's not a good outcome. Sometimes it can help, but a lot of times it makes things worse. Now, here's the point of bringing this to light is I want you to think about this point, and that is it's what we believe. It's our deep core beliefs as human beings that drive the success of any institution that society creates. Therefore, what you believe is one of the most important things about you. If you believe that justice should be driven by fairness, objectivity, not tainted by any bias, the only way you're going to achieve that goal is if what you believe is what everybody else believes in the institution called our justice system, right? It's the same thing with education. And that is that if we believe that every child has the need to have access to education, then we have to do what? Make sure that everybody's interested in educating children, not pushing an ideological bent or indoctrinating them to become social activists. And I can guarantee you that a big chunk of a lot of studies programs in the university has nothing to do with helping young people learn how to think for themselves. It's all about indoctrinating them into becoming social activists. And there's a lot of high schools out there, a lot of high school teachers who are committed to the same thing. That is not a good outcome for our country. And so what can you do? Here's my question for you. When it comes to what you really believe deep down in your core, how would you fight for that? I mean, how would you fight and contend and invest to see that what you believe, right, is spreading to other people? How would you get people to clarify what they believe so that you can see that your beliefs align? Because only when you have shared values and shared beliefs can you actually build an institution that benefits society. That's something to think about. Until then, signing off, the Salty Pastor here. If you could be so kind to go to our YouTube channel, and if you could like and subscribe, because the more subscribers we get, the more the channel grows. Now, the YouTube channel is only about a third of the audience, maybe less, but we want to keep growing it and we want to see it develop. Also, if you go to the website, sign up for an email. You can go right there, and I send that out every Monday morning. That kind of helps you give something to think about. And also, feel free to send me an email at saltypastor saltypastor@gmail.com, saltypastor@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. And if you got a question or an issue that you'd like me to address, I'd love to do it. Until then, remember, what you believe is one of the most important things about you.